All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us for this special afternoon edition. This is Left Bank Books welcomes Missouri author and MFK Fisher Grand Prize for Excellence in Culinary Writing award-winning author Nina Mukerjee Furstenau, who will discuss her exploration of food history, green chili, and other imposters. Today, Nina will be in conversation with beloved St. Louis food writer Anne Lemons Pollack. Left Bank Books is St. Louis's oldest independent bookstore. We would like to thank all of our supporters, the supporters of Nina and Anne, and everyone for their outpouring of love for our bookstore. We offer in-store shopping, curbside pickup, and delivery to anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world even. We are very happy to be able to bring our event series virtual. We believe that events are a way to expand your mind and bring in new thoughts to make the world a better place. And in this case, explore some food and travel, all from the beauty of your home. We hope that you enjoy this event, and we hope that you support Left Bank Books by purchasing a copy for you or for all of your friends at left-bank.com. Purchasing a copy of the book from Left Bank Books allows us to keep our bookstore and staff operating, and it allows us to keep this event series going, bringing you incredible authors like our authors today. So thank you so much for your support. I am Shane Mullen. I'm the events coordinator for Left Bank Books. I help produce our hundreds of author events each year with a fantastic team here in St. Louis. We will be taking questions from you, the audience, towards the end of the hour. So please type your questions as a comment. And you can do that at any point in time as you think of the question. And be sure to follow Left Bank Books on Facebook and YouTube to be notified about all of our fantastic virtual events. And now, about today's book, Green Chili and Other Imposters. Follow a food trail and you'll find yourself crisscrossing oceans. Join MFK Fisher Grand Prize for Excellence in Culinary Writing award-winning author Nina Mukerjee Furstenau as she picks through lost tastes with recipes as codes to everything from political resistance to comfort food and much more. Pinpoint the entry of the Portuguese in India by following green chili trails. Find the origin of lines. Trace tomatoes and potatoes in India to the Malabar Coast. Consider what makes a food or even a person foreign and marvel how and when they cease to be. Food history is a world heritage story that has all the drama of a tense thriller or maybe a mystery. Whose food is it? Who gets to tell its tale? Respect for food history might tame the accusations of appropriation, but what is at stake as food traditions and biodiversity ebb away is the great and not always good story of us. Early on in Furstenau's book, a sentence gives me pause. We have tired soils. Given what you learn of her appreciation for the natural world, her pride and curiosity in all things food and culture, I could just as easily imagine myself reflecting on the state of the world and reading this as, we have tired souls. But Furstenau also offers us a healing. Look around you. See who you are, who you come from, where you have made your home, and especially see, smell, taste, understand, and savor what you eat. I was mesmerized by this ambitious book, a blend of memoir, research, and food lore, from start to finish. From inside her farmhouse kitchen in Missouri to the home of a traditional cheesemaker outside Kolkata. From the fish pond in her grandmother's garden to the tea gardens of Makabari. I walked with the author as she took me to multiple flavor-rich worlds. And that is a quote from the author Sayanati Dasgupta, the author of Women Who Misbehave. And now, I am so happy and proud to welcome our speakers for today. First, we have Nina Mukerjee Furstenau. Nina is the author of Biting Through the Skin, an Indian Kitchen in America's Heartland, winner of the 2014 MFK Fisher Grand Prize for Excellence in Culinary Writing. She lives in Columbia, Missouri, where she is joining us from today. And today, Nina will be in conversation with Anne Lemons Pollack. Anne has been writing about food a great while, but not so long that she remembers all the restaurants in her book, Lost Restaurants of St. Louis. She's reviewed restaurants, written cooking columns, and traveled for food, and she was daring enough to cook for and then marry the restaurant critic of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, Joe Pollack. Together, they wrote 3 guidebooks to St. Louis food, and many found monthly in and online many food and travel stories. Skipped a line, sorry. Anne carries on the tradition and is currently found monthly in and online at St. Louis Magazine and on her blog, stlouiseats.typepad.com, where she also writes about theater. She is also the author of Iconic Restaurants of St. Louis, which came out in November 2020. And you will find both of Anne's books and also the featured book for today, Green Chili and Other Imposters, on our shelves now. If you come into the store, you will find them. You can also order online. And now I am so proud and pleased to welcome our guests for the afternoon, Nina Mukerjee Furstenau and Anne Lemons-Pollack for Left Bank Books. If you would please help me in giving them a giant round of applause. Hello.
Hi there.
Good afternoon. Nice to be here. Happy to talk to Nina.
It's really nice to see you, Shane, and Anne. I appreciate the invitation. This is exciting for me.
Absolutely. I'm very excited. We have a lot of mutual friends, both of us, both of you, and I'm really happy for this event, and I cannot wait to hear more about this book.
Well, you know, it's interesting. Sean kind of almost took my job away in terms of talking about the book. This is just a wonderful melange. It is not a history book. I guess if I had to pick anything out, it might be a sociology book with a lot of history in it. But to me, the most important thing is that it's stories. It's stories about people and what they eat and how it got there. I know it's very fashionable these days to complain about the stories that are around recipes. And this seems mostly to be people who blog that say, I don't want to read the story. I just want to see the recipe. I think the stories are wonderful. I love to hear the stories around food. And this certainly is deeply involved with that. But I guess my first question for Nina is, the title, Green Chili and Other Imposters. Can you riff on that? Other imposters? Talk to me.
That's a very good question, Anne. The title is a play on words, of course, right? And I'm trying to draw attention to several things. One is that India is sort of known in the West for hot food, and that's not actually the case. Or hasn't always been the case. Some foods certainly are hot there, but it's much more a country of multiple cuisines that have layers of flavor in spices used different ways, but not necessarily always heat. So I wanted to maybe get people to start realizing that the cuisine is much more than just the pepper and the chili in this case. And in fact, the chili wasn't indigenous to India, except for perhaps there's one called the Bhut, which is also known as the ghost pepper, that comes from the northeast part of the country, that has either been there a super long time or is indigenous, because it was there prior to green chilies coming to the Malabar Coast of India. They came in 1498. You can document it because they came with the Portuguese ships that had been to South America. And those chilies, when they hit the shores of India, they grow very well in many different kinds of soils, and they just went everywhere. So that's part of the topic of the title, is to draw attention to this idea that food movement impacted cuisines, but it isn't always the entirety of what the cuisine is. I also, or in that particular spice, I guess, or I also am talking about sort of tongue in cheek about myself and other people who may, in my case, I look like I could belong in India and be from there. And in fact, my family's homeland is India, but I'm a Midwestern girl and I was raised here. So I'm a bit of an imposter as well. So what makes something foreign? What makes something that you feel is close to your heart and part of your culture? And so I'm trying to kind of get people to think about those ideas.
That's a fascinating explanation, and I hadn't even thought of it in terms of human beings. I was thinking in terms of imposter ingredients and how that worked in. You talked for a certain degree about how black pepper was around, but not the chilies that came in. And there's some interesting tales in here in talking about chili. But you're right in terms of the spicy. I hope that people have learned, many people at least, some people have learned that curry powder is not an Indian thing. It's a result of the colonization and the British coming in and trying, with varying degrees of success, to bring home the food that they had probably very hesitantly at first, I suspect, learned to eat in India when they deigned to try some of the native cuisine. And this mixture of powders, of dried powders, dried ingredients came home with them to be called curry powder. There are curry leaves, of course, but curry powder put me off Indian food for probably 15 or 20 years. So I didn't think I liked Indian food, and finally kicked myself in the rear and tried tandoori chicken, and off I went down the rabbit hole with all of Indian food.
Right. There's so many varieties to taste and enjoy. And you're right, curry powder is sort of a shortcut to try and make an easy way to translate the foods that the colonizers had come to love. But it really doesn't touch the flavors of India. It certainly doesn't, especially when you think about how spices are used, depending on if they're whole or powdered or roasted or at what point they are put into the dish, they release different flavors. And if you just, have a teaspoon of a particular 2 or 3 spices made into what's called curry powder, it's just not going to reflect the flavor of that dish.
Oh, absolutely not. And please let me hurry to remind the listeners that this is not a book solely about spices and spicing. There are lots of other interesting things in there that you really don't think of. For example, the potato, which is definitely a Western Hemisphere product, and how it got into Indian cuisine. Nina has these great descriptions of how one particular area in India has potato in a rice dish, and you can just see when you read her writing the person to whom she's talking, and they seem to frequently use the same line, the potato is ours, we use it here. So riff a little on the potato and the whole question there.
Potatoes, much as they are here in this country, they're just such a big part of Indian cuisine. If you're familiar with the various different cuisines, and in Bengal there's aloo, which means potato posto, which is crushed poppy seeds that you fry the potatoes in, and it's fantastic. There's in the South, there's masala dosa that has a spicy potato filling. There's aloo gobi, which is cauliflower and potatoes. There's so many potato dishes. And in Kolkata, the thing that the citizens are really proud of is they actually put potato in their biryani, which is what you were referring to, and it is delicious. And as you might imagine, it has become a comfort food in many ways, just as it has here. And it began hesitantly, like a lot of new foods, people weren't sure about the potato in Europe when it first came from South America, but they came to really appreciate it, and that it was a way that so many people were fed. I think the potato, I'm pretty sure actually, the potato, you can trace it to the end of most famines in Europe. Between the 17th and 18th century, there was 40 plus regional and sometimes bigger famines. Once the potato came in, the small farmers could plant a field of potatoes and they could withstand starvation when the armies would go by and requisition crops. They would still have calories and nutrition from the potato, and they lived. And so it really changed the standard of living for so many people. And it inspired people like Adam Smith, who wrote Wealth of Nations, to say the potato is a tool for public happiness because it fed people. And this idea, this Enlightenment idea of the potato being a tool for happiness, also fueled the idea of colonizers to have a moral right to rule over India because it was going to bring happiness to the people there. So, I mean, among other reasons, that was kind of in the background. The other interesting thing is we all know the French fry here and how it changed the diets of millions of teenagers going through fast food and many of the rest of us fast food lines. But there's a man named Antoine Augustin Parmentier who was a victim of several of the wars, and he was a prisoner of war 4 times. He survived because he ate potatoes, and that made him so excited about the potato that he started having events with potato dishes featured and, really talking up the potato. And Thomas Jefferson, and I'm sure his chef, Hemmings, I'm just losing his first name all of a sudden. James Hemmings, thank you. They both loved them, the French fries, and they brought that recipe back to the US, and our lives have been forever changed ever since then. But the other thing and I'll do this really quickly, but I can go on for a long time about potatoes. But the other thing, 2 things that potatoes really affected us to this day, and they're not taste and flavor, even though I've just spoken about that. It's as they relate to agriculture worldwide. Because of this love of potato, what they didn't realize at the time is when you plant a potato from a piece of tuber, you're actually planting a clone. And so when you plant fields of these clones, it becomes a monoculture. And so that was susceptible to disease. And we know some stories through history that caused potato famines. And that was because of that issue. So it spawned the pesticide industry because they were trying to avoid that kind of disaster happening. And we're of course, we're addicted to that now as far as our large scale agriculture. The other major trend that potatoes started was that they experimented, or maybe it was a little experiment and a little accident, and found out that guano really improved the yields of potato fields. And so,
hang on, for those who aren't aware of it, explain what guano is.
Guano is fertilizer from birds, so bird excrement. So the entire world got excited because if you can think about this, Europe was about the standard of living of Cameroon today. But if you could triple your potato crops, or maybe 4 times the yield of a field with applying guano, you're going to rise out of poverty. And so the entire world turned their eyes to where they could find guano, and we became ever since addicted to fertilizing in agriculture. So those 3, potato is the embodiment of happiness, which spawned all kinds of political change, and potato affected our addiction to not only fertilizer but pesticide use. So it's got a lot of history embodied in one vegetable.
I heard you talk about the not the fertilizer, but the pesticide question in another appearance you did. How about a couple of minutes talking about how that happened and how it led to this sort of thing? Because I think that's really interesting.
Well, I don't know exactly how this was discovered, but there's these islands called the Chincha Islands, and they are unique because they didn't have a lot of rain, but they had a lot of migrating birds. And so the island was, sometimes 200 feet deep in excrement. And so everybody turned their eyes to the Chincha Islands, and they wanted the guano from that island so they could improve their livelihoods and increase their yields of their farm crops. So there was a huge rush to find guano islands, and our U.S. military got involved, and we tried to appropriate islands so we could have first dibs on the excrement. I just got a kick out of it in some ways, because I was thinking about, here's all these people going to mine excrement basically, and there's all these thousands of birds sitting there just going, what are you doing? Minding their own business. And somehow their lives became very valuable.
Their lives, this gets into questions of feeding them for product. It's like chicken feed to get eggs, in effect.
Yeah.
In effect. Well, one of the early chapters in the book that I really enjoyed and was something I'd never thought about. One does not tend to think of India in terms of cheese. There are things that pop up like ras malai and the dessert sort of sweet dumpling type things and so on and so forth. But in my head, I understand it's a big country and so on and so forth. But Nina ended up on a cheese train. A cheese train. Let me enunciate that very carefully. And it apparently is one of hundreds and thousands of them that happen. So tell us the cheese train stories.
So, when you think about your dreams in your childhood, you may, not always know what they are. I had always wanted to go back to India. I don't think I ever envisioned that I'd be standing on a moving train with the doors open with hundreds of pounds of cheese in the same car as we went hurtling towards Kolkata one afternoon. So, there's modern cheese making plants rising up all over India. But traditionally, they've always been made in the villages, the cheeses that are the base product for a lot of the lovely desserts in Bengal. And you mentioned one, and it was Rash Malai, and it's a dairy-based dessert. There's others like Shandesh, my favorite, or there's Cham Cham, or there's Rasgulla, and they're delicious. They truly are. And Bengalis have a real sweet tooth, and we have probably because of that developed some real amazing specialties. So the sweet tooth of a city the size of Calcutta takes a lot of dairy. And so these villages around the city have trains full of cheese that are made. It's a simple homemade cheese. My mother used to make it when I was growing up in Kansas, a little bit like ricotta. But they make the cheese and they milk the cows, they make the cheese, they wrap the cheese in linen and put them in these baskets that are then hung one on each side of a long pole that hangs over the shoulder of the person taking it to the train station. These cheese baskets drip way all the way there, and they kind of bounce. They're very heavy, and they board the train with their cheese. They get off in Calcutta and they take it to either the cheese market or directly to a sweet shop where they are made into these lovely desserts. So I just had to see that happen. I wanted to see it from start to finish. And I had seen the tail end of that in my mother's kitchen in Kansas all the time when I was growing up. I wanted to see how it emerged how it emerged out of the countryside. And it was fantastic. I've never had an experience like that. And the family that showed us how they did milk their cows, how they made their cheese, they were so gracious, and they put up with all of us and our, we had a film crew interested that day. So they had cameras and microphones and we were in this yard right behind the home that had 3 or 4 cows, and it's where they had been making cheese for 60 some years. And they made, about 50 pounds of cheese that we watched happening. And then I followed that product into the train station and then got on the train with all the other families that sent their cheese into the city that day. And there's 4 or 5 trains like that go into the city every day. And they're hitting different villages. So that's a lot of cheese. It's full of, and they do refer to it as the cheese train because it's the right timing for when the cheese is milked and made and ready to get to the city. So it's just interesting, very fascinating.
Good stuff. What are they using to create the curd? Are they using a rennet thing? Are they using an acid?
So it would be an acid based on what they call mother whey. They save a little bit of whey from the day before, and they save this mother whey. If anyone makes sourdough, you know what that is. You keep a little bit. Or vinegar. So they've saved this whey every day. They save enough for the next day to start the whey, start the separation. For 60 years, it's the mother whey. They've had it. And it's, I watched the lady who's an expert at this, and, they don't use thermometers. They don't use gauges. They just know how to do it so well that they do it by sight. And, they just understand when it's ready. And, she would take a scoop of this mother whey and, gently put it into the pot where the milk was boiling, and it would start to separate, and she'd just do this gentle motion until it separated into curds and whey. And then she was probably in her close to 70, and she would just stand up from a sitting position with that wet 8-pound linen cloth full of cheese and transfer it to where it would then drain more, and they would take it to the city. I was so impressed. I couldn't get over it. I was spellbound by this lady. She was really amazing at doing this and has so much practice. I think all of us know that we get better as we practice. So.
Well, and it does indeed become instinct, and the comparison to sourdough and baking is a really good one. It sounds hypnotizing.
It was for me. Yeah, absolutely. India, Indian restaurants, in many ways, like Chinese restaurants used to seem to have many of the same dishes there that the Indian restaurant 20 miles away does. But like the United States, there are all these cultural streams that have come in. Mm-hmm. And one of the nifty things about the book is that you go looking at those. In Goa, in the south, where there's the seafood and where the Portuguese came in. So there's the Portuguese influence, for example. Hum a few bars on that, and what came out of that? Well, it's such an it may be that people aren't as aware of the multicultural nature of India. It has such a long history, and there's so many people that have settled there. And they've had impact on each other in their cuisines and other things as well. But since I was looking at food, that's the primary thing I was trying to learn about. So I started out doing the research for the book by identifying communities that I could get access to for talking to the matriarch or cooking with the primary person who did the cooking in the family, and learn about the traditional heritage foods of that community. And then kind of see by reproducing it what those flavors were and where they came from, if they were all from the subcontinent, or if they came in from abroad, or if they you'll see in the book, if you get a chance to read it, there's many ingredients we may not realize came from India that we are having daily in this country. And they came from Asia or India itself. And so that exchange of food, that movement of food, it kind of happened quietly. Maybe not at the time. They were a sensation, no doubt, when the first people tasted citrus in the West. But it just, over time, they've just become part of who we are here. We have lemonade, of course. We have, various different fruits that maybe like mango people are getting used to now. And it's just, that exchange happened in India early, many times, and it's still happening everywhere. But in the Portuguese, as you mentioned, in the Malabar area of India, they brought many different things: the tomato, the potato, the chili, as we mentioned. And they all had this circuitous route from South America. When that first globalization happened, it wasn't all coming east. It was also going the other way. It was like it was an explosion of food flavor everywhere in the world. So that impact on the cuisine of that area is, you can see it on the plate. And if you're in Calcutta, where I was primarily, you can see the different cuisines in what appears on family tables and sometimes even restaurants if they've impacted a wider community. There's Chinese Bengalis, there's Jewish Bengalis, there's Armenian Bengalis, there's all kinds of subcultures, just like we have here in this country in India. And those food trails are all unique.
Well, yeah, I was very pleased and surprised to see a discussion about the Jewish colonies there. Mm-hmm. I'm not Jewish, but I married into a Jewish family of eaters, and was quite intrigued by that, and to see how they've been, how that has gone in and what's survived and what has evolved in terms of things. But the fruitcake, for example, still, pretty European considering, but some riffs in there in terms of the fruit and so on. That and yes, there is a recipe for the fruitcake in there.
Some people will get excited about that, and some people will not be as interested. But that was a fabulous fruitcake, I have to say. And some of the best fruitcake I have ever had is from a Jewish bakery in Calcutta, who has been there forever, is much loved. They make fruitcake especially for the Christian holiday of Christmas. So it's a very multicultural, multi-culture celebrated kind of place. And I think that people there are just used to having all these different strains of food and custom, and they appreciate it in each other. And that was my impression. I really enjoyed that feeling of inclusivity, no matter who you were or what background you were.
Well, my general riff on fruitcake is, if it's the candied cherries that have turned you off over the years, just substitute another fruit.
Yeah.
There are lots of ways to get around that. If you're somebody that's likes spice cake, but not all the other stuff or some of the other things, I learned that and have converted to other people. There's a very funny joke recipe out of there that talks about candied red thingies and candied green thingies and hold them together with hairspray. And I've had those fruitcakes, but not very much of them.
No.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say the solution to that is maybe to try candying your own fruit, and then you won't have those experiences probably.
I would think that dried mango, somewhat reconstituted, would work very nicely in a fruit.
It might. That might be something fun to try, actually.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, yeah. Absolutely, because it works so well with those other warm spices that occur in a fruitcake. Mm-hmm. And we are, speaking of other ethnic groups in there, we are starting to see a couple of restaurants here in town that at least before the pandemic, were doing Indian Chinese.
Yeah. And it's I think it's distinct. I think you should try it yourself and see what you think. But it's a distinct history. And in the book, there's a chapter about a lady who is very much part of that history. And her food was fantastic. And I don't think it's like the Chinese I've had anywhere else. I feel like it's a distinct flavor profile. Yeah, when you mentioned about the restaurants in this country and how they might have similar dishes in the next town or the next state or just down the road from each other, that may be true because most of the restaurants in this country are a particular food cuisine from India, and there's many cuisines in India, and that cuisine is usually Punjabi. And so, for instance, my family's from Bengal, and those are not our foods. I certainly enjoy them at times, but that's not what we would have made in our home family for our home family table. So it's a different texture, flavor profile, different end result. So I think now more and more you're starting to see some of the regional cuisines of India show up in restaurants, primarily on the coast in the US, but I think that's going to be a trend that continues as people become more aware of so many choices in India, and the food is outstanding there. It isn't heavy and oily and super spicy all the time. It can be. I mean, if you enjoy that, and I do at times too. That's one type, but there's so many others, and I think that's fun to watch people become aware of that.
Yes, it's an amazingly healthy cuisine, easy to adapt for dietary choices, both personal and medical and religious, certainly. And there are some things that are deep fried, but it certainly isn't a lipid heavy cuisine overall by any means. But we sound very clinical listening to all of this.
Yeah, we do. What are we doing?
said the retired nurse. But I one of the things that we haven't gotten to yet, the fact is that much of what Nina was doing was visiting family and getting some of their recipes and their stories. And there's some delightful pieces out of that. Talk a little bit about visiting your family and how they felt about this and the input you got from them, both positive and I suspect occasionally a little negative. Very tactful, of course, but
oh, they were amazing. I feel so lucky. I was raised in a smallish town in Kansas where I had a wonderful childhood, but it was very separate from the rest of my family. And I think I always had this desire to be there for a time. And for that, I cannot thank Fulbright enough for giving me the grant to do the research for this book, because being able to be there for 9 months was a dream come true. And I think for the first time, because of geography, I didn't know my family all that well. I just saw them occasionally as I grew up. So being able to go and stay there and cook in their kitchens occasionally and just ask them questions and get their input and find out, oh, that's not what that means. I have misinterpreted that. It was wonderful. They were so welcoming. And, if they had any, trepidation about me doing this, it never showed. They were very supportive. And I think that I'll always cherish that. It was wonderful for me personally to be there on the ground. And I think for writers, as you may agree, Anne, when you're going to write something, if you can experience it yourself, and it is going to influence how you write. And so if having the opportunity to have boots on the ground was really helpful for my writing process.
Some of the images of working in the households are fascinating to me, just in things in as minor as the layout of the house and how this worked. And there's an intimacy there and another dimension to things that that are very satisfying. Am I correct in saying that it is still almost completely woman's work, the cooking?
I would say much of the time. Of course, just like here, there are men in families who really like to cook and enjoy that. I'm assuming I met several of them that were really fine-tuned towards culinary experiences. But I think for the majority of families in India, the women are the cooks, just like probably even still true here, probably.
I was, much of my food conversations when I was younger occurred in the hospital setting. Late at night in an ICU when things are calm, but you're watching a patient and checking readings every 15 minutes and so on and so forth. If nothing else is going on, you get into some long, involved conversations. And one of the things I found, one of the commonalities I found with physicians, most of whom were male at that time, by the way, more than 50% of all medical students in the United States now are women.
It's totally changed.
Yes, it has. Yes, it has. But the commonality of talking about food and what did you eat when you were growing up. And these guys were house officers, residents and interns, and occasionally fellows. I wonder if that name is going to get changed.
Yeah, it might.
Yeah. But even with attending doctors, when you brought up food, you would see eyes light up. And it just amazed me to find out who cooked and who had opinions and what the best way was to take care of that mutton and to go with the mutton and so on and so forth. It's really quite astounding. This is such a great commonality. And it's much more interesting than talking about breathing, but breathing and eating are the two great commonalities. And
exactly.
It just draws so well in terms of that sort of thing. I'm going to go off to the side for a minute. You got the Fisher Prize. I am an immense fan of Mary Frances Kennedy Fisher. In fact, it was one of the commonalities that I found with the aforementioned restaurant critic at the Post-Dispatch, who I eventually married. And that's just, and I understand you're a fan also.
Absolutely, yeah.
Mrs. Fisher is such a glowing example of food and life and how they are joined together and so on and so forth. And I'm sure that that's the reason that your work called out to the group that gives the prize. The prize was not for this book. It was for your previous book, which is memoir-ish, but there are also recipes in there.
Yes.
One of the things I've learned, and apparently editors have learned, is that people cry, "Where are the recipes? Where are the recipes?"
You want recipes, that's right.
Yes. And this is sort of an offset to the people who say, "I don't want the stories, just give me a recipe."
Yeah, it's the opposite. Yeah.
Indeed. If you can put a dish down on the table and say, "Okay, this comes from," and she says that, but I didn't have ingredient Y, so I substituted, the food works well. So how long have you been reading Fisher? When did you find her?
So when I wrote that book that got the MFK Fisher Book Award, I was unaware that there's a category of books called culinary memoir. I just didn't know. So, but I had gotten familiar with her about that time. So I was in my upper 40s before I came to MFK Fisher. And I was struck because she was using probably what I think is the best kind of writing. What she would do is use something that kind of connected people at, I'm going to use a pun, the gut level of culture, that you could connect with and she was using what seemingly simple language to open up a whole world, an era, and a situation that you would not be aware of otherwise. You would not maybe understand the scarcity of the war years in this country without having, unless you maybe, if you were lucky, read a history book that mentioned food in it. But she was able, through that type of writing, able to open up this whole situational era, also gender issues. I mean, all kinds of things with this seemingly simple language. It just hooked me the minute I read anything by her. And
oh yeah,
yeah.
There are a few people that don't get her, but very few. She was remarkable, and I know in recent years there's been some argument that her books were, especially when stories did sometimes get repeated, and when you write over the course of 50 years, easily, stories will get repeated, and it's like, well, she left out this, or she misrepresented that. Well, that happens. And I don't know that she ever swore that that was the truth and nothing but. She had a child out of wedlock. And the books were so vague about how this happened and did she, didn't she, et cetera, et cetera. She apparently never acknowledged who the father was, although there were rumors about that. But I do remember a story about her having on some hot night late in a pregnancy, having to eat a heavy meal in some romantic setting. And I'm thinking, I don't remember a discussion of a husband at this point. But a remarkable woman. And I think we're at the end of our time. I was going to disconnect that to everyday world, but let's turn it over to Shane.
Sure. I was trying to sneak in while there was a little such a fantastic conversation, and I am so hungry right now. Like, yes. I hope the audience is the same. I know we have an audience watching. If you have a question, be sure to type those up. I have a few of my own that I would like to ask because I was so inspired by the conversation. My first question, while the audience thinks of their questions, Nina, we have a mutual friend, and from my introduction, the book kind of references that there's an air of mystery to your book. And our mutual friend Laura McHugh is a mystery author. Yes. So I'm wondering how much of her kind of mystery writing influenced your writing on this book, and how that played into the
her writing is so amazing. And what I admire about Laura's writing ever since I first read it was her use of, again, she uses place oftentimes as almost a character in her writing, and it influences how everything feels, the atmosphere, the trepidation, the mystery. All of it is enhanced by her details that she places in her text. And I think that that's something I admire so greatly, and I love the use of place as a way to influence how a reader is feeling and what they're maybe paying attention to while they're reading. Because it can do it subtly without hitting someone over the head with the idea that this is a comfortable, homey dish. You can describe the atmosphere, and it makes you feel comfortable. It makes you feel like, oh, this is a cozy home dish. And that's a lot better if you can get people to feel that rather than be told that. I think that's great. And I think Laura just does that naturally. And so if I would say, I would say that would be something I pick up from her writing and I enjoy. And I don't know if that helps the mystery of my writing, but it certainly is something that's we're compatible with, and I admire in what she does. I think that's a good point, though, Shane. Maybe the next book I'll have to add a little more intrigue and mystery. Food has it inherently, and so when I'm following these food trails, it's like, oh, is it this, or is that who brought it, or is it this person? Who gets to say it's their food? And that's when it becomes a mystery. And, Laura, the consequences of Laura's character's situations seem so dire. And I think in food, it's a little bit, it can reflect dire situations, because that's what's so fascinating to me about food. It can be about taste and flavor and a convivial company and, all of these lovely feelings and ambience. And it can also be about scarcity and suffering and need. And, it's like one thing can encompass this whole spectrum of feelings and situations. And I think that, and I'll bring it back to Laura again, her situations can be that too. You have this lovely atmosphere of the Midwest typically in her writing, and all of us are in the Midwest. We know how wonderful it is, but there's this dark side too. And so that's interesting. I'd never had anyone ask parallels between that thriller and I like to think food's thrilling.
Yeah. Oh, same. And I mean, my favorite my favorite travel writing is food writing.
Yeah.
And same with travel shows. Like I love watching food travel shows. Like Absolutely. That is just my favorite.
Sure. Yeah.
My Anthony Bourdain story starts out across the street at what used to be Duff's when he had done a reading at Left Bank. And I was going to meet Joe over there later because a group of the local chefs had planned to do a potluck dinner. It was Monday night and the restaurant was closed, and a bunch of the local chefs were going to do a potluck dinner to fet him. And Joe was coming from one direction and I was coming from another, and I went in and sat down at the bar, and there was one other person sitting there 2 seats away watching a baseball game, and it turned out to be Bourdain. And I had read this was only after the first book. This was not later on after television and all. And he had the vocabulary of a chef in the book.
Mm-hmm.
I was astounded at how mild he was as an individual. And it was, by the way, Nina, a great night. He made a rousing speech about the importance of food and good ingredients and feeding people well. And by the time he got done with the speech, after a lovely dinner, by the way, they had the flaming torches and the pitchforks out, and they were ready to march on any McDonald's around. And a couple of the sous chefs ended up going to do a stage, sort of an internship with him in New York, because he was still at the French restaurant on Park Avenue South. So speaking of travel and food and Left Bank.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's really exciting that you got to meet him.
Oh, it was a great night. Somebody had a picture of them. A local chef had a picture of himself and Bourdain that he was showing me. There was a charity dinner I was at, and he looked at this. He says, "You recognize that picture?" I said, "I remember the night." He said, "You took that picture."
Oh, yeah. Huh.
So, yeah, good stuff.
Well, I think that, Shane, travel just seems to, food opens up the reasons we travel, those connections. So I can see why that's so compatible for a lot of people.
Yeah.
I once had a man in the bar at O'Connell's, the great hamburger saloon here in St. Louis. I once overheard a man there say, "Never travel for food. You'll always be disappointed."
Oh, wow. That's never been the case for me.
Yeah. Nope.
It probably depends on where you're going. If you're going to sort of posh places that are meant for people who are traveling all the time, they're going to
tourist traps.
Yeah, they may not be representing the true flavors of the palate of that region. And you have to kind of go find those.
Where are your expectations? Pollack's first law was always restaurants set their standards by the way they price themselves. But on the other hand, he was a guy who loved a good meatloaf.
Same.
But no, traveling for food is a fine thing. I don't know what that gentleman's problem was, but I can't endorse that.
He was going to the wrong places.
Yeah.
Wrong places.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Since we talked so much about Midwest, and barbecue is such a Midwestern culture, and it's also very regional. I am curious if you think that there are greater distinctions between the regional cooking of barbecue or the regional cooking of Indian food.
Oh, wow. Well, I think if you went north-south, greater distinctions for sure. Between states in either of those demarcations in the north or in, it really depends. Northwestern cooking in India is very distinct. Bengali cooking is distinct. Yeah, I don't know. Probably greater. I think so. Yeah. So it's just so varied, and there's reasons for the different comfort foods in every area, and of course they're based on place. What grew there, what the soils provided. We have such an exchange with our earth or with our place in the world. It's what that ground provides to us that we then are able to make something tasty out of. And so comfort food becomes really different depending on where you are and what grows there. And India is big, and there's so many different geographical regions that grow totally different things.
I think there will be several things in this book that will surprise readers, but I'm wondering for you, Nina, and for you, Anne, as a reader, what the most surprising thing you found when either doing the research or when reading the book?
I think I can pull it up right now. Hey, it was a quotation. A quotation from Tagore that I had never heard that is just lovely. Do bring some rosy mangoes in a cane basket covered with a silken kerchief, and some prosaic food as well, sandesh and pachua prepared by lovely hands. Also, pilau cooked with fish and meat. For all these things become ineffable when imbued with loving devotion.
Yeah. Love that.
Yes.
He's amazing. So that has so much power because I think we all connect with that, right? We all remember foods offered with love, probably from the first meals we had as babies, hopefully all of us. And that just connects humanity. It's lovely. Surprising. I think surprising for me might be some of the foods that left Asia and went to the West that I just hadn't thought about. And as far as foods that came into India, I was aware of quite a few of those trails just generally, but getting the specifics of them was quite enlightening for me. So I didn't really answer your question.
You just knew everything.
I just sort of sidestepped it.
Yeah, nothing surprises Nina. Yep.
I'm just a cool cucumber,
Yeah. No,
To
I
use
think
a
she
food
was
for-
well prepared. She was well prepared.
Yeah.
That's the angle.
There you go, Anne.
I mean, I'm always shocked by how few people know like where potatoes come from, and how they aren't as centralized to the culture that uses them most now.
Right.
Yeah. So that's very interesting to me always.
Absolutely. That food history is I of course, because of this is what I write about, I really think that the more we know about that, maybe the more we can see connections to subcultures between each other. And that's a wonderful thing. If we can start to see that, that would be a happy outcome.
Yeah.
We need that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that's a fantastic way to kind of wrap up this incredible hour. It has really been such a pleasure spending this past hour with both of you, hearing about fantastic food, incredible culture, and forgotten history. So thank you both so much for this amazing event.
Thank you for having me on, Shane, and Anne, you're wonderful to speak with and make me comfortable. So I appreciate that very much too.
No hard work at all. It was just great fun. Thank you, Shane. Thank you, Nina.
Thank you both.
And to the audience watching, I want to remind you that we do have copies available for sale at Left Bank Books, both in store, online, for mailing anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world. And mostly, I want to thank you for being here today and getting to spend an hour with you as well. And we hope to see you again next time. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.